Hi, I'm Rob Kitchen. I'm Music Education and Schools Program Leader at Sage Gateshead, and I'm a primary music specialist. So if a school wanted to work with a music specialist, the first place to go to would be working with your music education hub or your local music service. And then you could also contact organizations like Sage Gateshead, who will have bespoke opportunities to work with schools. So for example, at Sage Gateshead, we have things like the Big Sing, where you take part in a large scale singing event, and within that you also have opportunity for teacher training, and also would have a vocal specialist coming into your school and leading a singing workshop. Whenever I work in schools or meeting with head teachers, the first thing I'll do is find out about the school, find out about the sort of the ethos in the school. I find I've worked in and met many teachers across the region, across the country, and you find that each school has a very sort of distinct culture. And I think it's really important to try and find out and understand that culture and not just presume that every school is the same. So that's the first thing I do. In terms of music, I'll find out about, well, what have they got going on in school already? What skills do the staff have? And then try and understand what are the gaps and how can we support those gaps, and how can we work with the sector, work with the teachers, understand their practice, and how can they sort of help, start to understand our practice. So it's sort of walking alongside each other. It's really helpful for music practitioners before going into school to have awareness of the class that they're working with. Obviously, in terms of data protection, there's certain things that are hard to share, but certainly having an idea of how you can work, if you understand the class better, you can work more inclusively, and you can plan, your workshop or your lesson around the needs within a class. I think that's really helpful. I think it's useful for musicians to know what sort of topics they've been working on. Sometimes you can have, really lovely natural links between one area of your practice and maybe a topic that they're studying in school at that time. Or sometimes it's quite easy for you to just slightly adapt your plan to then really help embed another area of the curriculum. Though I do think your focus as a musician should be primarily, inspiring children to want to be musicians. I think the most important thing when we've got the cultural sector and the sort of the education sector working together is remembering the sort of the difference in training, the difference in backgrounds, the different views that we have of the world. It's like we're both on the same mountain, but we're on different sides of that mountain, and we have a different, what we can see can be very different, and it's about trying to help each other to see what the other person can see, share the view that you can see, and not make assumptions that we're both, even though we're on the same mountain, that we're not necessarily seeing the same things. The difference in learning styles, and I suppose this is attached to the last question. If you're a teacher, a qualified teacher, you have succeeded with your GCSEs, you've succeeded with your A levels, you've gone on and got a degree, or you've got a degree and a postgraduate certificate in education. That means that you're very comfortable and have succeeded in the formal education sector. I think it's important to recognize that a lot of, not all of the people, but many people who I work with, at one point they've sort of not succeeded, or they've felt like they've not grasped or understood the formal education sector. And a lot of their skills and knowledge has been developed and learned informally. So a lot of my work, for instance, a lot of my skills that I developed as a musician was with my friends as a teenager, in bands and playing gigs and trying to put our own gigs together. I spent a lot of time in youth clubs, working on community radio stations. I was in a lot of sort of community street bands. So the skills that I've developed would be described as non-formal and informal. And so when I'm going back into the formal education sector, I'm bringing a lot of that knowledge So how do it, you know, all children and young people listen to music, right? But they don't all play music, and they think that they have to be taught how to play music. Well, you know, a huge part of my learning I've taught myself. I taught myself how to produce music. I taught myself how to play drums. You know, I've had tutors along the way, but a lot of it has been, you know, working it out, going on YouTube, doing research on the internet. And they're the types of skills that I'm trying to share with young people, that, look, you can do this for yourself. It's not what to learn, it's how to learn. And then in terms of like working effectively with schools, it's that same thing. So it's about saying, look, this is who I am. This is my practice. This is my background. Okay. Um, Equally, if you have any sort of challenges with anything I'm doing within school, please speak to me. Please just challenge me on that. Please ask me questions. Please try and understand where I'm coming from. But then it's about revealing yourself, but it's also about recognizing that you have to adapt. It's like, I see schools as, you know, it's that thing, they're like a customer, as it were. And I feel like you want to try and move with them as much as possible. And if it gets to a point that doesn't sit right with me, you shouldn't just be chasing the work. You should move on, you know, do other work. Maybe there's a better musician to suit that school. And I think it's about sort of effectively pairing up the need within a school with the sort of the skills of the practitioner. So what I, you know, in my early days in my career as a musician, I was so desperate for work. I would just say, yes, I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that. And now I've got to a point where it's like, actually, no, the right thing to do is to speak to a school, understand what they want, and then try and find them the right musician who can offer the thing that they want. And it's that sort of trying to find those natural pairings where they can happen. I think we've got, within a school, effective work should have a contract, whether it's a formal contract or an informal contract. So a formal contract would be like an SLA. They're really important to have SLAs, where, you know, a service level agreement, where you're saying, this is what I'm offering you. These are the terms and conditions. The school can add in there, this is what we expect from the musician. And to have it signed, that, you know, obviously that protects both parties. But you also, you have to operate informally. You have to have those informal contracts within that. So, you know, yes, trying to establish, you know, a regular catch up. So all of the schools I work in, every single week, I'll try and catch the head teacher. Now, sometimes quite often the head teacher's like, Rob, I'm too busy, you know, move on. But you will find those moments, you know, once a month, where they're able to say, you know, Rob, this is what we're working on at the moment, or have you chatted to this teacher because they were concerned about that? So you have those informal relationships. I would encourage all schools to have a space to evaluate and support the musician or practitioner and reflect on their work at least once a year. I've had that recently, and it really helped me. There was various things that I just didn't miss, that I did miss, sorry, within my work, that when they were pointed out, they seemed really obvious, but had I not had that opportunity and given the teachers in the school the opportunity to just ask them a few questions, what's working well, what would you like to hang on to, what things are missing from Rob's practice, you know, what things would you change, could you give him any advice, those sort of questions. And there was just some brilliant things, like, you know, schools were saying, look, Rob, could you just let us know at the start of a term what you're going to be doing for the next 10 weeks? Because then we can link in with what you're doing. Or maybe we could take on some of that teaching for you. Or maybe we could, you know, throughout the week, you know, you might start the lesson off on a Monday, but we could continue it for you on a Wednesday. So just little things like that were just really good. So I think it's really important to adapt your practice when you're going into a school. I think it's just good to do that to keep your work fresh and help you feel invigorated. Yes, it does mean you have to do more prep. I spend immense amounts of time on the internet researching things. So for instance, I didn't know anything about letters and sounds in terms of teaching phonics until about maybe 6 years ago when I was saying, oh, beatboxing, phonics, they seem really similar. And the teacher, one of the teachers in the school was like, oh, well, we use this format. We use a format called letters and sounds. Why don't you look up the phase one sounds and work around that? So I just do a lot of research on the internet about the national curriculum, not just for music, but for all subjects. I try and find out about the schemes that they're using in school. So the reading schemes that might be happening in school, the schemes that they might be using for teaching numeracy and developing numeracy skills. A lot of stuff around coding is amazing. Coding is very similar to how people teach music. There's lots of similarities. So yeah, you just need to get on the internet, get on YouTube and do your research. And if you're willing to adapt your practice, there's a lot of stuff out there. You can watch YouTube videos and go, do you know what? If I just did that idea slightly differently, it would help me teach this subject. But that's the whole creative side, which teachers are actually doing all the time. And actually a lot of music practitioners are delivering the same way that music is being taught for years. Very didactic. It's very sort of, it's how they were taught as kids. It's not really progressed at all. Whereas if we look at how, how teachers teach reading in school, that's massively progressed in the last sort of, 10 years. So that, I think there's no excuse for particularly musicians. Get out there, do the research. So for the practitioner, I would quite often in the past, I'd go in and do 10 weeks looking at percussion, a 10-week percussion drumming workshops. And you would get to week number 10, and then you would suddenly find out that one of the kids was a drummer. And you're like, oh, why didn't I know that before? Looking at progress is really, you get to week 10 and suddenly you've got a group that can drum and you leave the school and you never see them again. Long-term work allows you to really think about progress. It allows you, so I've got young people that I've worked with from reception right through now until they were like, 16, 17. And it's amazing. You see them going off and studying at conservatoire level. And you know that you've had a part to play in that journey. It allows you to signpost young people to other tutors. It allows you, if you're working from, let's say, reception up to year 6, so over 6 years with a group of, 7 years with a young person, you can really take them on that journey and you can really go, okay, now you're this stage, you should really, why don't you think about auditioning to get onto the Sage Gateshead's Young Musicians program? Or have you thought about joining Chili Road Band? It's about thinking about that journey. When you're just doing short one-offs, it's really hard. It's really hard for a school to sort of you come in and everybody's like, oh, wasn't that class? And then you just disappear in it. It's sort of like those moments are really brilliant for children, but it's quite disempowering for the school and the culture within a school. If you're in there for a long amount of time, the school, you build up this trust and you build up this understanding of each other. And it becomes a far greater relationship for everybody involved. For instance, I developed a whole area of work around beatbox phonics. That only came from working long-term in a school. And I was able to have a dialogue which was about, okay, I'd like to take a few risks here with my practice and try out new ideas. Some of them might fail, but some of them might be really great. And also I was able to go from working long-term, built up this relationship with the school where I was able to start asking teachers, well, how do you teach phonics? What do you do? What ideas do you have? And so you start to have these sort of natural things that form out of that. Ideally for me from working long term is that the teachers become upskilled and take on some of the work. What can happen though is because you develop the trust and you develop the skills, you can then end up being in a situation where you're like, well, actually Rob could take that PPA, couldn't he? Which again is great because you're still helping out and you're taking a pressure off a school. So it's long-term work allows you it just allows you to problem solve, and the trust allows you to sort of go, okay, well, how can we How can we hit this together? A recent one is there's been an animator working in one of the schools I work in, and we've gone, oh, do you know what? You're doing this and I'm doing this. Well, hang on, why don't we team up there? Why don't you produce me animations and I'll create music for them with this class? And why don't I give you the music from this class and you create animations with this class? It's things like that that are able to happen as a result of these long-term partnerships. So discovery in lessons for children and young people, for teachers, is important to me because it's that whole thing again around allowing people to learn their own journey. It was that thing of like when I had my first child and they discovered that they could walk along the top of a wall and then jump off. I've not done that at all as an adult recently, but as a kid, I remember that. And I remember, wow, this is exciting. And then thinking about a baby, when a baby drops something off their high chair, and it's like and what they're discovering is gravity. That's the thing they're playing with. We make an assumption now, we're just like, yeah, things fall to the ground. But it's that for a baby, they're going, well, why doesn't it float up to the sky? Why does it fall down to the ground? And it's those questions, like humans, where, we're designed to ask questions. We've evolved to ask questions and then find the answers. If you start the lesson off going, well, this is the answer. This is the learning objective, right? This is what you're going to learn today. Suddenly the learning is less. For me, I would argue it now doesn't seem as exciting. Okay, well, we already know why that exists and why that's the case. Whereas if we do the thing first, so for instance, if we drop, the apple falls off the tree, right? And then we go, well, ask the question of, well, why did it fall off the tree? And then it fell off the tree because of these reasons. The child's still going through the same learning objective, but it's like, well, the apple fell off the tree because of gravity, and gravity is this, blah, blah, blah. Now let's do some experiments about apples falling off trees. Well, I don't think now that's as an exciting lesson. I just think it's a huge motivator, isn't it? It's like, if you have something inside a box and you take it to a group of young people and you're like, a group of children, let's say year 1, and you shake it and it's like, well, what do you think's inside the box? Well, that's far more exciting than showing them the box, taking the shaker, putting it in the box, shaking the box and go, what's in the box? A shaker's in the box. I mean, it's like discovery is just, it's an obvious motivator in terms of learning. For me, it's like, it's obvious. If you lead the dialogue in terms of reflecting and encouraging teachers to sort of offer critique on your practice, it's very empowering. So don't wait for a teacher to say, well, I'm not very happy about what you've done this term. Go to the teacher at the start, say, okay, this is what I'm planning to do this term. This is the progress I would expect to see, but I don't know. But would you come and sit in and observe me work? And would you, at the end, would you be happy to fill out an evaluation? At that point, you own the feedback. So if it's negative, then you still own in that feedback. You're still in charge, and you will still have the sense to demonstrate that you want to learn, that you want to change. Now, if schools are then critical of you wanting to learn, well, that's a bit of a bizarre concept for a school. Schools should be always, they should be in, they're places of learning, and we should be encouraging everybody in the school, whether it's the head teacher to the youngest child in reception, to always be learning. So that's the point. Now, I asked for some feedback, and I said, I was quite clear. I said to the school, don't just say it's great. I know whether my work's great or not. Tell me what you would like. If I was the best teacher in the world ever, what would you expect to see? Let's aim towards that. And the feedback was some of it was great, very positive, which was brilliant, but I didn't learn from that. I felt good about it, but some of it was very critical. And it was a bit, I then sat down with the head teacher and I was like, you probably want to sack me after seeing that. And he was like, no, not at all, Rob, not at all. Let's just talk through it. And we discovered there was some parts where I was like, well, this isn't really fair, because a general classroom teacher has that information on the students. I'm coming in blind each week. to this, and they were like, yeah, I totally get that. Well, you know, don't worry about that. But then there were other points where I was like, you know, in fairness, I could be more organized. In fairness, I do have this 15 minutes, which if I didn't do this here, I could get the space set up slightly better if that's what they would like. And I don't know, yeah, when nobody wants to be, you know, told how to improve, but you sort of, if you want to be really brilliant at your job, you just have to work in that way, and you have to be resilient, and you have to remember that actually every single teacher in a school once a year will sit down with the head teacher, and they get observed by the head teacher, and their practice gets pulled about, and that school will have to go through an Ofsted, and that head teacher will have to feel like their whole premise and their whole being is being scrutinized by somebody they don't know. And you know, it's empathy, it builds empathy. If you're willing to do the same thing, it just allows you to, again, be more sympathetic and more understanding of what it's like to be in a school. I mean, one thing to add is if you're able to reflect on your practice first, that's probably the best thing to do. So to never assume that you're doing a good job, you know, come out and then speak to the teacher at the end, you know, I could have done better there. I realized this young person wasn't engaging in the activity. Can you give me some advice of what I could have done differently? Or, you know, I think if you reflect first on your practice and you scrutinize your own practice first, and then take that to the teacher and ask, is there anything you want to add on to that? Then again, it's like, it puts you in a position of power again in terms of improving and self-evaluation. Sort of a really general summary is looking at, so a lot of musicians, we have a lot of popular musicians who maybe didn't succeed and didn't do GCSE or A-level music, but developed into very successful bands. And she analyzed the ways in which they worked with each other. So the conversations they had, the sort of the informal approaches they had towards creating music. And then, you know, from reading that book, you can then start to think, okay, well, how would I take that learning into my practice? So Musical Futures was an organization that did that very well and based a lot of their work on Lucy Green's work. So yeah, looking at that. Great book, Dave Price, Open, is a brilliant book in terms of just understanding when people come together and have open collaborations with each other and trust each other, the sort of the success that can build out of that. I'm a, you know, big fan of his ideas, and he does a whole, you know, he sort of did a lot of work around sort of project-based learning. Sort of, I suppose those three books are sort of a good, like, right now I get why Rob works the way he does. They're a good sort of grounding.